Evening. Here's Candy, the Wonder Pup. This is Gordon Causey. I'm coming to you live and unscripted. I haven't said that for a bit. Most of my videos are unscripted. Today is the 30th of January, 2025. It's just after 11:45 p.m. in the Eastern Time Zone where I reside. I'm in southeastern Ontario. Oh, a couple hours drive from hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes away from the big smoke of Toronto. And not far enough away in my books. I see someone has shown up. I bet you my guess will be it's either Eat Me or Danny. Friends from Montreal, Canada, which is about 4 hours the other way. Candy, you can't see her. Where? Let's get Candy in here. There she is. Candy the Wonder Pup. Wonder Dog. It is Danny. And I love he always puts the cross and the praying hands up there. God bless, my friend. Shake paw, lay down. Speak. Speak. All right. It's not the special ones that she likes so much. Let's put this, reorient this back. There we go. Got some information to share that some may be aware of, some may not. Last night during I'm not even saying the word. If I say that word, she goes ballistic. But I want to share some information that I did some reading up last night during last night's stream, which was on last night's stream, talking about a more esoteric topic, the freedom of the press, and has Canada ever really had the freedom of the press? Has it ever really existed in our Western world? And that was yesterday's video. But during that video, just when it started, Eat Me came along. That's the username. And she said that there had been a crash, a Black Hawk helicopter and a civilian aircraft over Washington, D.C. So after, like everyone, I'm assuming everyone already knows what's happened. Passenger jet, small airliner out of Wichita, Kansas, landing at Ronald Reagan International Airport, or Ronald Reagan Airport in Washington, D.C., crashed into a Black Hawk helicopter, and there were 60 passengers on board and 4 crew, all dead. There were 3 servicemen, I guess, on the Black Hawk, all 67, all dead, either from their injuries resulting from the crash, or if they survived the crash, they died freezing to death in the Potomac River, which was something like 35 degrees Fahrenheit, which 7-8 degrees Celsius, whatever, freezing cold water. And horrific accident. And there's all kind of commentary out there. There's all kinds of expert opinion as to what happened. All kinds of speculation about the degree to which the flight control tower, what role they may have played in the accident. Was it pilot error? I don't want to delve into that. There's plenty of comment out there already, but something did come out. Trump was sitting probably in the Oval Office signing more memos, executive orders, statements, and things of that nature. And he's brought up a lot about the fact that DEI and how he is repealing all the DEI directives of the Obama and Biden years. And he was asked directly if he believed that DEI policies played any role in the crash. And he said, I don't know. We will see, is how he framed it. That didn't stop. I've seen the MSNBC type talking heads from saying that Trump is claiming that it was DEI. He didn't say anything that led to the crash. He didn't say anything of the sort, but he didn't rule it out as a possibility either. He said, we will see. We'll find out. There's going to be a thorough investigation. But what I wanted to find out, and what I've managed to uncover a bit of information on, is what role DEI played with the FAA. And just to put a fine point on things, the FAA is the Federal, what's that? Federal Aviation Administration. It's a political body that governs the aviation industry. That's the FAA. And DEI, everyone should know by now, stands for, it's an acronym standing for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Those who do not like it pejoratively say that it stands for didn't earn it. And Trump has made a big deal about returning to or establishing a merit-based system. And I think it's important to unpack when they talk, what's merit mean? What does it mean to merit something? It means to earn it and to deserve it. You're deserving of the position and you've earned it. That's what merit means. And at any rate, what I found out was that all the way back in 1997, during what would have been the Clinton administration, the FAA, Federal Aviation Authority in the United States, established a partnership program with universities to for a diploma program for people to learn the job of becoming an air traffic controller. And that was the pool, if you will, from which air traffic controllers were hired post-1997. Once these universities started to graduate students with a degree in air traffic control. I'm not sure exactly what the degree would be, what the name would put on it, air traffic control specialist, whatever. That was the pool from which they hired and employed people as air traffic controllers. In 2005, it was recommended that the program be enhanced to include even more training, make it even more comprehensive, because the FAA wanted to streamline the process, because there has been for a long time and continuing to this present day, reportedly a shortage of air traffic controllers. And so by expanding and making the program more comprehensive at universities, this course in air traffic control, the thinking was, we can shorten the time frame from when people are hired to when they're actually functioning in the job. However, though that enhancement was rejected, and it was rejected not by what they call the Air Traffic Organization, but it was canned, this idea of enhancing the program. That was canceled by the FAA, by the Federal Aviation Authority, which is a political body. It is, and so in 2002, but they still had this program where individuals would apply to go to university, accepted into a program, and then the airline industry, the FAA, would hire individuals out of the graduates of this program at universities, and they would be put into the FAA's training program to become air traffic controllers. But then in 2012, the Obama administration canceled the program of hiring individuals out of this pool of university graduates of this program, and they started to hire, quote unquote, off the street. And as a matter of fact, they basically disqualified individuals who had gone to university to take this program. Imagine you're spending, I don't know what tuition would have been back in the late 90s, early 2000s, probably $10,000 or so a year. Not sure how long a degree would take, 2, 3, 4 years, whatever the case. But then the Obama administration in 2012 said, no, Everyone who has taken post-secondary education in learning to be an air traffic controller are ostensibly disqualified from getting into the profession. We are hiring off the street. It actually led to lawsuits, individuals who had taken the program and graduated and then were shut out of the job that they trained for, that they'd gone to school for, launched basically a tort action, class action lawsuits. I don't know the results of those lawsuits, but it suggests that, well, is it possible that DEI policies played a role in the events that just happened last night in Washington, D.C. over the Potomac River? Can't say. It's impossible to say at this point. There's a lot of speculation out there. But it brings us to this whole question of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one thing I frequently say on my channel is about how this woke left liberal agenda, equality of outcome, that so often they frame it in very positive language. They choose their words very well. Diversity is a good thing. Isn't diversity a good thing? Isn't equity? You don't want to be fair? You don't want fairness? You don't want equity? Oh, well, yeah, I want equity. And inclusion? Don't you want to be inclusionary? You don't want to be restrictive. You want to be inclusionary. So it's very positive sounding language. But at the same time, I also want to give the devil his due, if you will. And how did we get to a point where DEI, programs like DEI and prior to DEI, the term typically was referred to as affirmative action, at least in the United States. And the purpose of affirmative action was to basically say that, African Americans, Blacks make up X percent of the population. And so they should have X percent representation as air traffic controllers or as senior executives in major corporations or as research scientists or as, in every strata of society. And so there began to be measurements of workplaces, industry groups, professions to see, okay, 50-50, the population is roughly 50-50 male, female, or is it 50-50, our senior Wall Street executives? Is there a 50-50 male, female balance? Is there, if Black Americans make up 16% of the population, do they occupy 16% of the seats at boardroom tables for major Fortune 500 companies or whatever? And affirmative action sought to ensure that these ratios were brought into play. But how did we get there? How did we get to that point where we decided that this was perhaps a good idea? And I think it's unfair to just knee-jerk assume that the people who were behind these initiatives, that they were bad players, that they had evil intentions. I don't think so. I think ultimately their motivation was altruistic and good. They wanted justice. They wanted fairness. But the devil is always in the details. And there can be the dreaded unintended consequences. Oh, we didn't think about that. And but how did we get there? And the simple fact of the matter is, and it is a reality that anyone of my age or close to my age or older certainly remembers well, is that for a long time there was, and I don't like using the word systemic prejudice, but it was pervasive. There was pervasive prejudice. And there were, in my mind, I can't prove it with data, but having eyes and ears, I could see it happening. I know the jokes that were told. There was a very high degree of prejudice in the world back certainly before the 70s and 80s, but definitely in the 70s and 80s as I was growing up, and certainly in generations before, where if and I'll just use, a Black individual, highly qualified, extremely well educated, wanted to aspire into certain industry groups or professions, there would be something of a door slammed in their face because of race. Even if they had the qualifications, even if they were more qualified, the prejudice permeated society. We used to tell jokes like this, and people would laugh. Look at Don Rickles, made a career out of racial stereotyping. And that seeps into people's conscious minds. And well, I don't know if I want to hire a Black guy. And so it was from that, it was from that world that DEI, affirmative action, that these programs sprang forth. But the whole bit about unintended consequences, do you replace racism with racism? Do you replace exclusionary hiring practices with exclusionary hiring practices? I think it was Martin Luther King who said, when you fight fire with fire, all you get is more fire. And I'm fairly certain that it was the Mahatma Gandhi, famous first Prime Minister of India, I believe, the gentleman who basically liberated India from British rule. He said that when you take an eye for an eye, the whole world goes blind. And I think we've woken up to the reality now. And I think prejudice still exists. Racism still exists. There are still, and I encounter it still in today's world. But the degree, it's not comparable to, say, the 60s and 70s when I was a little kid growing up. We used to live in Staten Island, New York. And back in that era, and I think it still exists to this day, in our little street, in the area we lived in was a quote unquote white area. And New York and major US cities, even smaller towns and cities, there are white areas and there are Black areas. And on the street we lived in, something that got passed down to me through family lore, through family history, is that a dispute arose between neighbors on our street. And one individual said, to get back, okay, you keep this up and I'm going to go and sell my house to a bunch of N-words. I don't want to say it. It is too distasteful a word. Bunch of Blacks, but using the pejorative N-word. And that was only in the 60s. That was when I probably would have been 1, 2, 3 years of age that this happened. People did not want to live in a racially diverse area. If a Black family was to move into a predominantly white neighborhood, what would happen is then white individuals would start moving out and property values would drop. All in the Family dealt with this issue. It was called blockbusting back in that time. And I'm remembering the specific episode in which they portrayed it. A Black businessman came in and was willing to offer Archie a substantial increase over market value for his home, and he was inclined to take it. And then they would take that house and would sell it to a Black family, and then they would this individual, well-financed Black individual, would be able to buy up the other houses in the neighborhood at a discount because everyone would start selling. And that did happen. I'm going to read what's being written. Danny's filling up the chat. He writes, it doesn't make sense. The Black Hawk panels would have lit up like a Christmas tree. Anti-collision warnings. There's all kinds of speculation out there. What I'm hearing is that the Black Hawk helicopter was equipped with night vision goggles. They don't know what were the pilots, were the people manning the Black Hawk actually using the night vision goggles, because apparently it was a clear night and everything, rather than relying on instrumentation, they were relying on line of sight. But when you use night vision goggles, which I never have done, but we've all seen representations of it in videos, and the quality isn't the best, and you lose depth perception and things of that nature. And so that may have been, speculation is that may have been a contributing factor. Also, there's talk that the passenger aircraft, that it had just been diverted from one runway to another. I think they were diverted from runway 1 to runway 33. And there's all kinds of talk about what happened that night, but it's all speculation at this point. And I also, there's so much happening in the world right now, and it certainly is a tragic event what happened, but it's been politicized now. Everything is politicized. Everything is politicized, and perhaps fairly so. If the Obama administration and the Biden administration certainly continued the policies, Trump tried to walk things back in 2016 when he was president, from 2016 to 2020. But then Biden came in 2021 and everything that Trump had done was canceled, and they reinstituted the programs of the old Obama administration. And this 2012, deciding, well, we're not going to hire individuals who've gone to university for this because they have an unfair advantage. They have the tens of thousands of dollars to get a degree, to go to take a university program in air traffic control, whereas less advantaged groups don't have that advantage. So rather than hiring the university qualified graduates, we're just going to, it's going to be an application process, and we're going to disqualify those individuals because they are advantaged. And we want to be diverse, we want to be equitable, and we want to be inclusionary. And look at the world we're in. Let me continue on reading the live chat. Again, he says, I knew Obama was evil. Again, he's saying equality is what we want, not equity. Ideally, what should happen is, there should be a colorblind hiring process, a blind hiring process, where you hire the most qualified, the most suitable individual for the job. And it's all not just education. Air traffic control, from everything I understand, is an incredibly high stress position, and while someone may have a high level of education for the job, that doesn't mean they necessarily have the psychological makeup and temperament to deal with a high stress job. You can be a straight A student, brilliant, genius level, but if you don't have the temperament to handle high stress situations, if you're prone to depression and things like that, well, maybe not the best person. And they do apparently have screening at the FAA. But another problem they have is that over the last 10 or so years, the amount of traffic in the air has grown exponentially. There's been a huge ratcheting up in the amount of air traffic going up, but the number of air traffic controllers hasn't grown at a commensurate rate. And so you're talking about people who are overworked, and there are suggestions out there that they're also, for the work they do, that they are underpaid. So could that have played a factor? There's so many different moving parts to this. And I don't know that we'll ever have a real definitive answer because everything's been politicized. It's like the whole COVID crap. And we'll never get any answers because COVID is more about politics than about science. That's the world that we have devolved into. We've become hyper political, and everything is political in today's world. Everything is left and right extremes, and we fight. And is that by design? I think it likely is. A lot of it is by design. A lot of it is organic. They've laid the groundwork to get everyone fighting with each other, and now they can just let things progress naturally because this is the world we live in. Hyper political, everyone going at each other. Let me read what Danny's filling it up. Eat Me has shown up as well. Danny says, I have seen job offers that state either whites need not apply or priority given to non-whites. Yes, and that has to stop. That has to stop. But at the same time, equally, individuals, we need to, I was at work, and again, I work in a simple retail environment after leaving the Army. And it was a young kid who worked there part-time. Trying to remember his name. I'm not going to say it anyway, but I can't. Anyway, this young lad who I worked with, he doesn't work there anymore. I was talking about, you're in high school, what course do you like? What are you going to do? Blah, 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 normal stuff. And this kid was into track and field. And I said, how good, were you good? And I said, I sucked at track and field. I ran the 5,000 meter once and I came in 4th. That was the best I ever did. And he said that in our area, he medaled and that he was able to go to OFSA. And I said, oh, awesome. I never got to OFSA. I never even made it to CASA. Ontario, I forget what, Secondary School Association. And Central Ontario Secondary. So if you made it to OFSA, that was all Ontario. And I said, how did you do it off? So he go, I did horrible. He got all the blacks from, and he said some very racist type things about black individuals that I found incredibly distasteful. And I called him out on it because you have to in today's world. That's no longer acceptable to judge people based on how much melanin content they have in their skin. And I'm not saying that to be, look at me, I'm so, it's just reality. It's just reality. It's time that we stop looking, racism is all based on, it's shortcuts. It's just a simple attempt by humanity to make shortcuts and to group people into one big category, and it helps to make sense of a very complex world. But we've got to move past that. Because it just in a multiracial society, multicultural society, diverse society, individuals must be allowed to rise to the highest level based on the quality of their character, their intelligence, their drive, their competence. There are all kinds of metrics to determine how far a person will go. And none of them have anything to do with how much melanin is in their skin. But as to Danny's point, equality is what we need, not equity. What we need is equality of opportunity so that everyone has the chances to aspire to aim as high as they want, but not equality of outcome. And that's what we've devolved down into, a world where the expectation is that there will be equality of outcome. And sometimes life isn't fair. Sometimes other people are better than you. Sometimes they're more driven, more competent, more capable of handling certain situations than you. And that's life. I've got Danny writing, for the first 15 years of his life, races other than white I only saw on TV, yet I'm no racist. when I was growing up in New Jersey, where I spent kindergarten 1, 2, 3, 4, the entire school I attended, there was one black student with which I was aware. Like in the whole school, there was one black student. Her name was Kathy. And there was one Vietnamese student. And that was it. That was the amount of diversity, at least in terms of melanin content. We had Italians, we had Jews, we had Irish, we had this, that, and the other, but it was pretty much lily white. And likewise, when in 1975, when I was still in grade 4, we moved back from New Jersey to Burlington, Ontario. And I don't think there was one person of color in the entire school that I remember. There was none in my class. I still have my old school photos from grade 5, and not one student. It was lily white. And then likewise, then we moved to Portland, Oregon. And again, the entire school was lily white. I had a friend, Jason, who was Hispanic. I don't even know where. He might have been Puerto Rico, maybe somewhere else. And Jason was the only kid I knew who was somewhat out of the mold. Didn't matter. We were still friends. Anyway, and then when we moved back, when I was 12, and we moved back permanently to Canada, that's when things started to open up. There were a number of students in grade 7 who I remember who were black, but it wasn't a large number. It was 5 in my grade 7 and 8 classes. There were maybe 5 or 6 students who, it's such a contentious topic and such a controversial topic. And it's the controversial things that we need to talk about, because things don't get better when you just say, well, we won't talk about that. We won't talk about that because it's uncomfortable. And so things fester, and we need to be out in the open. I have a guy who lives on my street, a nice guy. However, he's Archie Bunker on steroids. He will drop the N-word. One day we were sitting having a beer a few years ago, and he, like 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I'm not sure. I've lived here now almost 10 years. And something came up. We started talking about the NBA. And he said, oh, why would I want to watch a sport with a bunch of N-words? Bang. And called him out. Both myself and my neighbor said, whoa, come on. Hi, really? And he got up and left. He goes, I don't like those people. You got to know them. There are some black individuals I don't like. It blows my mind, the level of ignorance that can be out there. And typically, and that's what it is now, and I don't mean that in a negative, pejorative sense. Ignorance just means lack of knowledge. And this guy is born and bred in this area, and this area is predominantly white still. And I'm speaking as a father with 3 multiracial kids. So I want to live in a world that is colorblind. I want to see my kids rise on the basis of merit, getting what they deserve and what they earn, not, this equality of outcome garbage. That's soul destroying, just to get a position because you fill a tick in a box. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have trouble with this. C.O. Jamalik. Everything is objective and measurable. Trump said value experience over education during his first campaign and presidency, and that was aimed at black women obtaining degrees. And then I've got 3 emojis that I can't quite make out. This is the question. To what degree should education be valued in the marketplace? Because it's not the only metric that determines whether or not someone will be successful in a job. Just because you have a letters behind your name doesn't necessarily mean you're going to excel at any particular job or profession. There's temperament. There's ability to manage stress, as I mentioned, for jobs like air traffic control. There are all kinds of metrics out there. Education's one. Intelligence is one, but it's not the only one. I've got Kojay Malik writing, and sorry if I'm butchering your name, C.O. Jamalik. I'm just going to say Jamalik, and I apologize, not intending to offend. They write, or this person writes, Black people couldn't get certain jobs in the past because of not having the degree. Now Black people, especially women, are obtaining degrees, so change the rules. I'm not sure exactly where you're going. Let's see. Malik goes on to say, the world doesn't discuss the white affirmative action hires white males have historically received. I just did. The world, and I'm part of the world. I just talked about the fact that earlier, probably 10, 15 minutes ago, about the fact that, yes, that did happen. Going back into the 70s, the 60s, probably well into the 80s. Affirmative action, I think, started to come into vogue in the 1970s. No, it definitely has been part of the conversation that white individuals had, that there was prejudice in the workplace, and that there were individuals, even highly qualified individuals, but because of their race, they wouldn't be hired. The white candidate would be preferred, even if the Black candidate had superior qualifications and superior suitability for the job. Call it a racial nepotism, if you will. Go reading on. I saw a fascinating documentary one time that I'm going to talk about in a second. Eat Me is writing, oh dear, Archie on steroids ain't good. And Kojay C.O. Jamalik is writing, the world has convinced him, not sure who him is, his likes are important because he is white. The world told him his likes matter. Try and unpack that. The world has convinced him his likes are important because he is white. The world told him his likes matter. This is one of the things, this is an uncomfortable conversation to have. And so a lot of times it is simply not had. And I talked about the fact that in my last video, having something of a unique perspective, having grown up in the United States and Canada, and always approaching things from the role of the outsider. That's kind of what I've grown up to be. I was talking about this yesterday. Canadian born, we moved to New York City, later to New Jersey, went through kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3, 4. And at that point, I'm pretty much part of the mass. But then grade 4 and 5, I moved to Canada, back to Canada, Canadian born, but had spent most of my growing up in the US up until the age of 9. And I was the outsider. And, I didn't use the right words. I didn't have the right accent. And then I adapted and became part of I adapted to the culture around me, and I became a good Canadian, learned the right words, learned not to talk like I was from New York. And that's the way I talked up until I was 9. But then, when I living a year and a half in Boylington, Ontario, I learned to change my accent and to talk like a good Canadian, start saying A and everything. And then we moved to Portland, Oregon, and then I'm thrust as an outsider again, because again, now I'm speaking with a Canadian accent and I'm saying, oh, sorry about that. And they go, sorry? What do you mean sorry? It's sorry. I'm like, sorry? Sorry? Really? Sorry? Isn't that an Indian woman's dress? And so I'm on the outside again. And then we moved a year later, and I developed something of an American accent, learned to talk with longer vowel sounds. And then we moved back to Canada, and I'm on the outside again. And so it has given me a perspective where being on the outside is comfortable for me. It's become part of my DNA to not be part of the mob groupthink. And that's a long digression. Let me, what spurred it was what, oh, great. I did something with my computer, or with my, not my computer, but my tablet here that I'm using for this. Live chat. There we go. I got it back. And so C.O.J. Malik, what got me off on that tangent, I had written, the world has convinced him his likes are important because he is white. The world told him his likes matter. Not sure exactly what to do with that. Danny's wishing, for what it's worth, Danny and Eat Me, les deux, they're from Montreal, Canada. Montreal, Quebec, Canada, where the official language is French. So they sometimes fill up. Bonsoir means good evening. Danny is writing, we go through pain and discomfort in order to grow, or you get stale. The one thing I would say to C.O.J. Malik is that, we're living in a broken, fallen world that is never going to, there's a saying, something put out by people far smarter than me, that the perfection is the enemy of the good. And then what happens is, in an attempt to achieve perfection, what we often do is throw away things that are good. And you end up with these so-called unintended consequences. Well, we were pursuing perfection, but perfection is not possible. We'll never have a perfect world, not on this side of the veil. Incidentally, I don't recall having seen you commenting before, C.O.J. Malik, but I always have it here. I'm a Bible professing Christian, and I'm thinking I wish I knew the chapter and verse, but there's something called the Great White Throne Judgment that's written of in the book of Revelation, where it says that when the Great Throne Judgment comes, that there will be everyone of every tribe, of every language, of every nation. We're all going to be there. We're all going to be there, irrespective of melanin content. It's an annoying conversation, but it's one we need to have. Danny's writing, trust in Jesus, he is king. Eat Me is writing, hard times make, oh, here we go. This is a great quote. Thank you for sharing it, Eat Me. I don't always get it right. Hard times make strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make weak men. And weak men make hard times. The circle of life. And we have had it very good for a very long period of time. And now, because of that, we're not accustomed. We can't deal with discomfort. I've spoken of it many times on this channel, how we've come into a world now where we have been conditioned that if you can't sleep, take a pill. We got a pill for everything now. Your legs shake while you sleep, restless leg syndrome, which we used to call Jimmy legs. Here, take a pill for that. Anxious, take a pill. No need to have any pain, misery, discomfort in your life at all. If you're hungry, here, phone this number. We'll have food to you in 30 minutes, or it's free. Forget about having to cook and slave and, prepare meals. Everything's ready made. Just pull it out of the freezer, throw it in the oven or the microwave, and you'll have food within an hour, or maybe even only a few minutes. Instant gratification is the world that we live in, and we're not accustomed to dealing with pain, misery, discomfort, even just simple discomfort. And some people cannot handle it. And that's the world we live in. And, that's an amazing thing. Think about the, convenience of this world. I have a great aunt who was born in 1901. I used to go, I lived downtown Toronto. She had an apartment downtown. Later, then she moved into a senior living facility, and I used to go visit her regularly. I found it fascinating to talk to someone who had been born in the year 1901. And, she lived not far from where I live now. She lived up in an area called Perth, Ontario. It's kind of on the way between where I live now and on the way to Ottawa. And they used to go to church. They used to bundle everyone up into a horse-drawn wagon, even in the dead of winter. And that was how you got there. And then she had to go through the Depression when so many people were out of work. Let's see what C.O. Jamalik is writing. In a bland world, conformity for underwhelming people congregate. To force differences to dim themselves so they won't outshine mediocrity. We seem to be in a world where we worship mediocrity. We want mediocrity. We want equality of outcome. And equality of outcome automatically means that you are not going to reward those who are the best, the brightest, the most diligent, the most competent. You're not going to reward them, because if you reward them, then that means others are going to be, lower. And that defeats this whole idea of everyone being the same, which ultimately is a Marxist model. It's Marxist ideology to the core. And when you look at how Mao instituted they called it the Great Leap Forward. And I've talked about this before. The Cultural Revolution in China, in Maoist China, they instituted this program called the Great Leap Forward. And again, this is where branding, where words are so important, because when you're selling something, you want to pick positive language. And so it's not just, we're not just moving forward, we're making a great leap forward. What? Oh, so you want to go backward? Either it's a great branding statement, the Great Leap Forward. Oh, that sounds good. And what did it do? Killed about 100 million Chinese individuals. Mao murdered about 100 million of his own citizens for this great leap forward. There's an authoritarian, totalitarian aspect to this Marxist ideology, which is incredibly dangerous. Now, is that to say that our system is perfect? That there aren't problems with it? Yeah, there are. Look at what we did to Japanese Canadians during World War II with the internment camps. They weren't concentration camps, but Japanese Canadians, sometimes even second and third generation Canadians, lost all their property and were forced into internment camps. And when the war was over, they were released, and it's basically not even an apology. Just go start over. David Suzuki, famous environmentalist, and notwithstanding my disagreement with guys like David Suzuki on the whole environmental front, at least in terms of climate change, what happened to him and his family was heinous and horrible. Or you look at the residential schools and what happened. Yeah. But have we ever seen in a Western democracy a situation where 15, 20 million were of a nation's own citizens were killed, as happened in Germany in the 1930s and 40s, or in Soviet Russia during the period of Stalin, where 60 million were killed of starvation or in the gulags, or China, where over 100 million are reckoned to have been killed by the so-called Great Leap Forward. Let's read. C.O. Jamalik is writing, strong men, quotes, are rigid, inflexible, and kind of weak. What's your definition of a strong man? there's this sense in the world right now being foisted on us, programmed into us, really. The news basically tells you to think this, tells you to believe it. They tell us how to feel about things. And this whole idea is that, and again, it boils down to a Marxist philosophy that everything is about power, and that everything is warfare, everything's a class warfare thing, and that, it's all about advantage, and that we need more femininity in the world, and that we need to diminish masculinity. And it's masculinity that has had the world reach this pinnacle of technical excellence, architectural marvels, it's amazing that so many who shake their fist at this world are living at the best time in human history ever. And they say, oh, it's horrible, we got to tear it all down. And that's what's happening. It's getting all torn down. And we're tearing down the good in search of perfection, and perfection is impossible. Wayne Norman Esquire is writing that he is coming late, and that he's taking it that I am opposed to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And ultimately, if I have to give a simple yes, no, yes, yes, I am not in favor of DEI. At the same time, as I said much earlier, I acknowledge and can recognize the reasons why affirmative action, DEI, that these programs were instituted, because yes, we used to live in a world where that was incredibly racist and incredibly prejudiced. I don't like going so far as to say systemic, but you could almost say that. I'm just going to get, I like to give frame of references. Where am I coming from? What do I know? I grew up all over. I mentioned I lived in New York, I lived in New Jersey, I lived in Burlington, Ontario, Canada, Portland, Oregon. And it was in Portland, Oregon that my father was the branch manager of a Canadian bank. What had happened was Canada, we have 4 or 5 big banks. I'm not going to say which one my dad worked at, but there's BMO, Bank of Montreal, TD, Royal, Bank of Nova Scotia. Those are the big 4, and there maybe the National Bank, 4 or 5 really big banks in Canada. And one of the banks started to try and operate retail banking establishments. They were going into Oregon, and they already had in 1977, they had 4 branches of my dad's bank in Portland, Oregon. And he was given one to manage. His was the 5th, and it was right downtown Portland. And Portland had a street called Halsey Avenue. And I don't know the geography well enough, but Halsey Avenue was a dividing line between black and white. As you moved further in one direction, it got whiter. As you moved further in another direction, it got blacker. And my dad's branch was right on that dividing street, and it was actually on the black side of the street. And without having any affirmative action stuff, over him, he made it a point to hire black tellers, because he wanted the staff at his branch to be reflective of the community in which he was operating. And then just before the branch was opening, and my dad was incredibly stressed out. There's a lot of work, construction delays, this, that, and the other thing. And he was very stressed out, and he had developed a case of strep throat. So his voice was scratchy. He was having trouble talking. And some guys from Toronto had come down to our house to, for the grand opening. And they asked my dad. What happened was It was down in the family room where my bedroom was just down the hall from the family room, and I was kicked out. Said, go to your room, read a book. Go play Mattel electronic football or go do something. Get out of here. I was 11. So I go down to my room. And then the next thing I know, I hear my dad, through strep throat, but finding his voice, swearing like a sailor, dropping F-bombs. And my dad was one who would never swear or never drop an F-bomb. I never heard him drop an F-bomb at that point in my life. And it was only years later that I heard the story. And what had happened was the guys from Toronto head office asked my dad, they said, what are you doing for your grand opening? And going to Ecclesiastes, my dad said, well, there's nothing new under the sun. We're going to do coffee and donuts. And one of the guys from Toronto said, and I'm going to quote it, word for word, this is what I was told he was said to him, said, don't do that. In your neighborhood, you'll have every coon in the neighborhood coming in. And my dad lost it and he said, if you come here, I'll kick your ass and send you all the way back to Toronto if you come in here and tell me how to run my branch. He lost it. And that's the framework from which I see things. I'm just trying to catch up. And there's being a lot written. Okay. C.O. Jamalich is writing, that would be men-made systems run by strong men. The world we live in is the product of everything that has gone before us. And we live in the most advanced, more freedoms than have existed in any other point in human history. There's a big argument being made now that we're watching those freedoms slowly erode away as we travel down this road of equality of outcome as opposed to equality of opportunity. I've got Danny writing, only winners won trophies when I was a kid. Now everybody gets a participation ribbon. We no longer teach our kids how to lose, hence the whiny generation we have now. Wayne Norman is writing, slavery? I need some context around that. Yeah, slavery existed. And then after slavery, the Jim Crow era. And I don't think Canadians, I'm a Canadian, and I think the larger majority of the people who tune into my streams are Canadian and don't have necessarily the same reference points I do in terms of American history. And I don't know American history as well as an American would, but I do believe I know it better than most Canadians. So I know about Jim Crow, and I know about, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, where slavery was not, people think the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, and it did. However, there was a loophole, and that was if you could find an excuse to incarcerate an individual, then they could be enslaved again. And what happened particularly in the Deep South during what they called the Reconstruction era, because so much of the infrastructure of the South, bridges, railways, and everything like that needed to be rebuilt. So if you could charge and imprison a Black individual, you could enslave them again. And you had things like vagrancy laws, where if an individual was outside and they didn't have any money in their pocket, and you're talking about people who had just been slaves, so there's a very good chance that they didn't have any money in your pocket, well, then you could throw them in jail again and then get them working on Reconstruction. Basically enslave them all over again under the guise of a penal system. Masculinity has caused every war. Oh yeah, there were never any wars when Queen Elizabeth or Queen Victoria there were women saying, or Catherine of Russia, There's no wars when it was women, or Margaret Thatcher when the Falkland Islands were invaded. It's so funny. I would ask CEO Jamalik, just because I'm getting a sense of your worldview. Do you believe that there are two genders? Because everything your argument is putting forward now at least suggests that you acknowledge the binary nature of gender, that there are two. There's male and there's female. There's XX, there's XY. And you think the world would be perfect if everyone was XX and we got rid of all the XYs, or if we changed XY and destroyed the Y chromosome and made got everyone to wear a dress, like the former undersecretary for HHS in the US, that guy who liked to wear women's naval uniforms. I've got Danny writing to eat me. We have a soy boy leader now that we need to get rid of. It's starting to look like an October election. Yeah, it is. I've got DDDDD, whatever that means, writing DEI equals black. Not necessarily. It doesn't have to. I was surprised to find out. I thought the percentage, the black population of the United States, those, so-called African Americans, although I'm not particularly fond of that term, because I don't think, I've known people from Africa. I've known people from a number of different countries, a lot from Congo, what used to be called Zaire. I used to work in Mauritius and North Africa, Algeria, because I'm bilingual and I've worked in French language or environments with people who are French. I've met a lot of African-speaking French people, and Africans and Americans are entirely different people. And I'm not a big fan of the term African American. Is a white guy from South Africa, is he an African American? And what about people from Egypt? Egyptian people can quite often, and that's Africa. So I have a big problem. Black, white, it works. Anyway, I've got COJ Malik asking, do you think technology wouldn't have improved if women were at the table having as much input? Well, you have to understand, how did we get to the world that we're in now? Let's take a look at the bedrock foundation of our society, and that would be the family unit. And we tend to think that the way things are now is that they're the way they always have been, but that, of course, isn't true. The way the world used to be is that women were primarily responsible for raising the kids while the father went out, while the husband went out and earned money. And that was the basic dynamic. Women, of course, give birth. Men can't. Two genders, men, sperm, women, egg, basic biology. And women did not enter the workforce in one time. During times of conflict, women have entered the workforce. World War I, World War II, when all the men have been off fighting, women have entered the workforce at that point. But it never really took firm hold until the 1960s, after the development of the birth control pill. And who developed the birth control pill? The scientific field, male-dominated, always had been, less so now, because now women have been, quote unquote, liberated from something that it used to be the very fabric of reality, is that women gave birth. And, would be needed at home. You didn't have formula. Most children being brought up for generations, for hundreds of years, for millennia, were breastfed. And you didn't have birth control. So, a family of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 kids, and young children need a mother's care Mothers are their primary feeders of them. So we've had this overhaul of society that people tend to forget about. They seem to think that the way the world is now in 2025, that that's the way it was, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. The world wasn't the way it is now. But, we're very short-sighted in our world. We've abandoned this. We've just thrown it in the garbage. It's just mythologies that are only suitable to primitive thinking people. And people look at this through a very narrow, shallow, literal lens. And a talking snake. Like, what? I'm going to believe in a book that talks about a talking snake. Oh, that's the level of your analysis. That's as far as you're just going to look at the literal, and that's as deep as you're going to go. A. Einstein? Come on. When you unpack the story of the garden, there's deep, significant meaning to it. You've got a garden, and all of a sudden a snake comes in. A snake, a scary. It's almost there's a primordial fear among human beings that permeates societies and cultures about snakes. And you have God has created this garden, and you let a snake in, God? Really? You let a snake in the garden? God, if I was God, I never would have allowed a snake in the garden. I'm here to tell you that the reason the snake was in the garden is because God loves us. God wants our lives to have meaning. God wants our lives to have achievement. God wants us to strive. God wants us to aspire. But if we're living an infantile existence where everything is perfect and lovely and great, and we can walk around naked and it's not too hot, not too cold, food available, nothing to strive for, everything's handed to us, what kind of existence is that? So a snake comes into the garden, whispers into Eve's ear and says, you don't need that guy. You don't need the creator of heaven and earth. You don't need the maker of all things. You can be a God unto yourself. You can decide what is right and what is wrong. You can do what is right in your own eyes. Now, I tend to look on that story in an allegorical fashion, not a literal, not a I think there is utility. If you want to look at it literally, superficially, you can still find some utility, but I find you miss so much of the deeper core meanings that are underwritten in the text. And so now you've got to strive, you've got to work, you've got to toil, you've got to sacrifice. The Bible's full of sacrifice. You got to give up. You got to bargain with fate and say, I'll give up today because I'm going to make a bargain. By giving up today, I'm going to get something better later on. And, and these stories permeate scripture. And there's, and you can't get to the bottom of it because there's so many layers to it. But a lot of people, because church hurt or because someone's wronged them, and because they want to sit in the throne of God and say that I'm everything in a bag of chips and I know it all. Men are the reason. If we got rid of men, or if we eliminated toxic masculinity, the world would be utopia. Oh yeah, we've been look at everywhere that they've sought. Stalin was after utopia in Russia. Mao was seeking utopia in the Soviet Union. Mao was China. Let me read. This could go on all night. I'm just trying to catch up. And I'm on a tablet, so I have to scroll through with my finger. Okay. I'm going to go to Wayne Norman, Esquire, who is writing, you made a statement regarding races that died in this country, specifically Japanese. The internment camps are well documented. Danny's saying that I should ban someone's racist ass. Don't know who you're talking about. DEI isn't just specific to African Americans, all minorities. The problem is we get into this whole idea of identity politics and you know, what group are you in? Your rights are determined by what group you're in. Well, I'm white. Okay, well, these are your rights. Well, I'm black. Well, then these are your rights. Well, I'm black, disabled. Oh, these are your rights. You know, well, I'm black, disabled, and homosexual. Oh, hey, you won the social credit score lottery then. You know, and is that the world we want to live in, where we are reduced, where humanity, regardless of melanin content, is reduced to, you know, what camp, what tribe that you belong to? You know, we were on a march toward, you know, we had the civil rights era in the United States, Martin Luther King leading all those marches. It's the only reason I know half the cities I know of in Alabama. I never would have heard of Mobile or Birmingham or there's another one, I can't remember the name. Mobile, Birmingham, whatever, all these cities. Alabama was ground zero for the civil rights movement. And, you know, we were and are progressing. You know, Martin Luther King, in one of his famous speeches, saying, you know, I have a dream that one day people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. But how can you have a society where you judge people by the content of their character when you have to fill out a form that states which group you belong to? Are you a minority? Are you, you know, part of this community, that community? There's this division, and it's called divide and conquer for a reason. And I find it so funny that they are so ironic that so many who identify as liberal left, that they want, I don't know what it is, guilt? I guess that's probably part of it, is that I don't think I deserve to be living in the greatest, at the greatest time in world history, with more freedoms, more technology, more liberties, more freedoms than anyone has ever had before. So something must be, you know, have we ever lived at a better time than this? If you want to go back, you know. And how did we get here? Well, you know, if I was in charge, it would be better. That's what Stalin said. That's what Mao said. Let's get back to the live chat. Eat Me's writing, Adam wasn't force-fed the apple. He made his own choice. It's a metaphor of free will and what it brings us, awareness. Okay. Eat Me thinks I'm being assaulted by trolls tonight. It's all good. It's all good. Maybe not. I've got Wayne saying, it was that way in this country up until 1964. What I'd be curious, Wayne, what is specific about 1964? Was Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968. Kennedy, I think, was 1963. And 1964 is probably, you know, you're right in the middle of the civil rights movement. That started really, I think, in the 1950s. I haven't studied it extensively, but I have read a lot on it and consumed a lot of content about the civil rights era. And there's one image emblazoned in my mind, and it just showed the ignorance of racism. And there was a black gentleman, and I think it was probably Alabama, Mobile, Birmingham, or it's bothering me, Montgomery. That's the name of the other city I couldn't remember. And there was a black gentleman dressed in a suit, wearing a hat, and he was just walking across the street, and some young white kid came up and kicked him, jumped up in the air and kicked at him, and forced this older gentleman, probably, judging by his gait, the way he walked, probably an older man in his 60s, maybe 70s, maybe even older. And it caused him to stumble, and the hat fell off his head. And this gentleman, in a very dignified fashion, just reached down, picked up his hat, put it on his head, and continued walking. And it showed, I thought images like that did such an amazing service to show the absolute stupidity, ignorance, and mentality of those who hold to a racist ideology. And it elevated, and it opened a lot of people's eyes. So let's read on. Just trying to catch up. Okay. CO Jamalik is writing, as long as our businesses doesn't encroach upon my rights, other rights, it's not my business. Fair enough. Wayne Norman's writing, we always wanted to be included. Unfortunately, many whites didn't want it. And there are still individuals who exist, and it's incumbent upon individuals such as myself to call it out when it happens. And on you as well to call it out. And I am a huge admirer of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi in one specific respect, and that was their call to nonviolence. Because it showed to me, to face violence with dignity shows the ignorance of those who resort to violence to achieve their ends. Unfortunately, the sad part is it can be costly. It can be costly. And anyway, going on. Amy writes, Trump, I'm encountering so much Trump derangement syndrome out there right now. And, does Trump deserve to be criticized? Certainly. Criticize the man's policies. I took issue with one just yesterday, talking in my video, talking about this deportation of students exercising their right to free speech to protest in favor of Hamas, which is something I disagree with. I'm a big supporter of Israel, but notwithstanding my support for Israel, I would not want someone to lose the right to protest and to speak their mind, even if I disagree with them, because that, to me, is the litmus test for a functioning liberal democratic society, is that even if an idea isn't popular, you have to allow it. You have to allow it. Otherwise, you're entering into the slippery slope that leads to totalitarian authoritarianism and inviting the spirit of Stalin and Mao into your society. Now, CO Jamalik is, I think, quoting MLK. I don't know if I'll know this quote. CO Jamalik has MLK saying, I fear I might have led my people into a burning building. And CO Jamalik is saying that that's a summation, a paraphrase, that it was words to that effect. When was that said? I'll look for it. I'll look for it. CO Jamalik says, you like saying to me, I guess, I like labels. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in, is that everything is labeled now. What group do you belong to? What group do you belong to? I talk often on this channel and say that I'm something of the poster child for cancel culture, and that, I'm white, Christian, male, straight. And so it's like, shut up, boomer, canceled. You're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to put your ideas into the public sphere. And they have no currency because we've got enough old white guys like you already expressing their ideas. Divorce the ideas from the individual and the voice being said, and just judge the ideas on their merit in of themselves, divorced from whether it's a white guy, black guy, Chinese, who cares? Let's just talk about the idea. And unfortunately, in our world right now, we're more interested in the labels. Well, wait a minute, we won't talk about that idea because the labels on the person putting forth that idea, it's overrepresented. What? Just talk about the idea. Okay. CEO Jamalik is saying that they're trying to, the freedom to speech, the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, we don't have freedom of speech in my native Canada. It's a privilege, not a right. Whereas in the United States, it's something of an unalienable right. But you've had political commentators stating, and I know Kamala Harris has talked about the need to restrict free speech. I think Elizabeth Warren has invoked similar language. And a robust, functioning liberal democracy has at its core the absolute necessity of free speech. And you cannot censor if you can censor an idea because it's distasteful or unpopular or controversial, well, then when does it end? And who gets to decide? Who gets to determine what is acceptable speech? And we end up living in George Orwell's 1984 with the Ministry of Truth dictating what we're allowed to say. I have Wayne Norman writing, we just wanted to be free from slavery and treated equally. It's interesting. There's an interesting dynamic because I'm in Canada. I've spent most of my life living in Canada. And years ago, and I've told this story on here before, but I'll say it again. I had a friend, my eldest son was going to daycare, and I became friends with David, who was from Indianapolis, black gentleman. His wife was from Ohio. Lovely couple. We got along like a ball of fire. And David was a lawyer, but he wasn't able to practice law in Ontario because he had not passed the bar here and was not a member of what they call the Law Society of Upper Canada. However, his expertise was in business law, so he was able to still work as a consultant. They had moved to Canada because his wife worked for General Motors as a senior executive. And so they had moved up. She was working for GM and he was working private as a consultant, as a business lawyer, dealing with Canadian companies who wanted to do business in the US. And Dave and I got on great. And one day we were playing golf and at a local golf course. And I had just been over to his house and I was remarking on how much I loved his house. I loved the house that Dave and Telva had bought. Beautiful. What I liked about it was very unassuming. From the front, looked like just a simple little bungalow, but it had been added on to and was just beautiful. But from the front, you'd think, oh, it's just a simple little bungalow, but it was built back. Anyway, I was talking about how much I loved his house, and he goes, oh, thanks. I said, I can't do much of an Indianapolis accent, but he said, when we moved here, I asked the real estate agent if we could live in this neighborhood. And I looked at him, I said, what are you talking about? He goes, well, down in Indy. That's what he always called Indianapolis. He said, down in Indy, I can buy any house I want, but I know in some neighborhoods, I'm going to have a pickup truck with 5 angry white boys in the flatbed. And then he said, but y'all don't have that here in Canada. And I went, well, maybe in South Oshawa. And he laughed. And then later, we were playing, as we were playing, he mentioned that he had gone to, I think the course was Angus Glen. It's one of the premier top-rated golf courses in Canada. It has hosted the Canadian Golf Open Championship. And he had gone there to play. And he remarked that when he went out on the putting green, the practice green where you go to practice your putting, he said that they charged a fee just to use the putting green. So I'd never seen that. I just wanted to practice my putting, and it was like $10. And I said, Dave, that's just because you're black. And he laughed so hard. We were sitting on a bench. He laughed so hard, he almost fell off the bench. He went down on a knee. He was laughing so hard. Great guy. But there is a different reality between Canada and the US. Things are better here. And I think it's because when you go to Toronto now, which is our largest metropolitan city, I think the GTA has about 8 million people. It's roughly the size of Houston. We're roughly in that same population when you take in the greater metropolitan area. And in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, there is no one singular dominant group. White Canadians, for lack of a better term, are less than 50% of the population. I think they are still the single largest minority, but what you have is a community of minorities. There's no single majority. If you get onto the TTC, the subway, the Toronto Transit Commission, and ride the subway, it is the United Nations. It is every corner of the world. And I love that. I lived in Ajax, Ontario, Canada, and my street was the United Nations. I had Gus from Greece. I had Anayat from Pakistan. I had Daryl from Grenada. Across the street, we had a family from China, the Chinese. I think they were Hong Kong Chinese. And there was Joe, the Italian. It was fantastic because, and I lived on that street during that August 2001. I think that's when that big blackout happened, and everyone came out and we all just communed together. One guy, Gus, the Greek guy, he worked as a chef. He brought his barbecue out onto the driveway, yelled at everyone, "Bring me your meat. It's going to spoil. We'll cook it all." And he had this massive barbecue, and he cooked all the steaks and hamburgers and hot dogs and everything. And we ate it all weekend because the power was out for in and around 48 hours. Good times. I'm just trying to catch up now. I'm going to be wrapping up soon. Wayne's saying that I'm an interesting fellow. Well, thank you. I'm sure you are too, man. Just subscribe. Looking forward to engaging with you. I look forward to seeing you on the live chats. I love engagement. I love learning. I do not claim to have all the answers. I'm like everyone navigating this incredibly complex world that we live in and bemoaning the fact that so often, the population is being herded. And we're all being herded into little camps. And my camp is supposed to be against your camp. And that can be based on race, religion, sexual orientation, you name it. And economic status, level of education, and on and on and on. And I am a Bible-believing Christian. And there's a reason there's no physical description of Jesus whatsoever. We don't know how tall, how short. We don't know how big his nose was or, what color his hair was. Nothing is in there. And my faith informs me that if it was important, if these things were important, if his height, hair color, skin color, eye color, if any of these things mattered, they would be in there. They're not in there because they're not important. It's the content of a person's character, the content of their heart. God judges the heart, not all the other things. But we have governments that want to judge by all these criteria. And that should be an open wake-up call to anyone who professes to be of the Christian faith. And I know that there are Christians, those who profess Christ, who are racist. And I know that exists. And I know that there's, I forget the term for it, Christian brethren or something, I forget the term, who hold to white Christian nationalism, which is disgusting. But you know what? Free speech. And if anyone of that ilk ever wanted to engage with me, let's go. I've had those discussions before. And that's where I pull out the white throne judgment, where it says every nation, every language, every creed, we're all going to be there. We're all going to be there, clothed in white, clean, not as a representation of our skin color, because I'm not white. And blacks aren't black. They're brown. Different shades of brown. And different shade, I don't know what you call this, pink, whatever. It's a, who cares? Anyway. I'm just trying to catch up. I'll tell you, I'm going to end this off. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up with something I've spoken on this channel about before, and it's the story of Joseph in the Bible at the end of the book of Genesis. Joseph, who is sold into slavery. And then rises to be the second most powerful man in the world's largest empire of that time. We're going back 1,500 years before Christ, so 3,500 years ago. Joseph is sold by his brothers into slavery and rises to be the second most powerful man. I'm going to truncate the story greatly because I want to wrap up. Becomes the second most powerful man in Egypt. He's got the Pharaoh's ring on his finger, signet ring. He has authority. He rides in the second chariot. Every knee bows to him. You'd think everything has worked out great for him. And he has two children. And the first one he names Ephraim. And Ephraim means that God has made me forget all the trouble of my father's house. And, Ephraim means God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Here is Joseph, the number 2 to Pharaoh in the most powerful empire of the day, most powerful nation state at that time. And he refers to that place as the land of his affliction. And I want to get the words exactly right. I got to go into it's right at the end of the book of Genesis. In Exodus, just one more. I'm going to see if I can find this. And I appreciate anyone sticking around to hear the end. Okay, I found it. It's in chapter 41. I'm going to start at verse 50. And it says, before the year of famine came, Joseph had 2 sons, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. I got the order wrong. For, he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. So that's the meaning of Manasseh. Joseph had been sold into slavery, rent away from his father, where he was his father's favorite son. And he says, God has made me forget all my hardship. And there's a lesson there, I think, for humanity, for all of us, regardless of our situation. What Joseph is saying is, I let that go. I let that go. Joseph could have identified with his pain and his misery and everything that had happened to him. He'd been stripped of his coat that his father had lovingly made for him, that so-called coat of many colors. He'd been sold into slavery. Even while in Egypt, he'd been falsely accused of sexual assault against his owner's wife and unjustly thrown into prison. And here he is, and he's saying, I've let that go. I'm not going to let my past difficulties define me. And he rose to be the number 2 man in all of Egypt. And then the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So here he is, the second most powerful man, riding in the second chariot, every knee bowing to him, and he refers to Egypt as the land of his affliction. And why does he refer to Egypt as the land of his affliction, where he's the number 2 most powerful guy? It's because Joseph is a member of God's covenant and chosen people. And he has been rent away. So this is the land of his affliction. He came from the promised land into the land of his affliction, regardless of what happened. And we are all marching toward the promised land, like Joseph. We're all marching toward the promised land. And we got to let things go and advance God's kingdom. And abandoning this book, we're doing it at our peril. And we see the way the world is going now. We see the spirit of lawlessness that's coming forward because people are justified in their own eyes. Well, I've been wronged. I can't let it go. And I'm going to get even. I'm going to get justice. Because, you're part of a group that oppressed my group. And this is nothing new. This is all of human history. This is the Hatfields and McCoys, to use another American reference. This is what happened in Yugoslavia when that situation blew up. The biggest purpose of my channel is to try and spread some gospel good news in a dark world. And so I like to end my videos. Appreciate everyone chiming in, and I'm sorry I couldn't keep up with the discussion. There's just so much being written. Appreciate C.O. Jamalik. Even though you disagree, it's fine. I absolutely 100%, hope you come back. And I can, even with people I disagree with, I often learn things. I'll just read a few. Emi's saying it's not about forgiving, but hanging on to a slight done before. Moving on is healthy, or else no one turn into a SJW. Forget social justice warrior. C.O. Jamalik says you have this Bible and know it's wrong, but yet still do things to others. They say God will bless you. Why not? Wayne is writing something. I want to read this. I totally agree with the concept, quote, but when you live in a country that constantly reminds you of your place in society, it's not that easy. Be bold, man. Be bold. That's all I can say. Be bold. Don't let others define you. And I know you know, I know things are, you know, in the intellectual, in the conceptual, it's far easier than in the real world, because in the real world, emotion gets involved. And, you know, we all seek approval. We all want it. I mean, to varying degrees, but there's no one who doesn't want approval. So, C.O. Jamalik is writing about the Stanford experiment. I've heard of that, but I can't remember specifically what it's about. There's so many experiments out there. Everyone take care. C.O. Jamalik is writing that when white people, I guess this is a Stanford experiment, that when white people were put in a situation like black people, they didn't like it much. No kidding. I have a fair bit of experience with this as an old white guy. I used to coach a basketball team, and I had a kid who was an amazing athlete. And he could have played any sport. And he had played hockey when he was younger. And he had a horrible experience where, like any 7, 8, 9-year-old, I forget exactly how old he was when he told me the story, but he was playing rep hockey, all-star type, you know, representing the town. And he tripped a kid, as you do. I used to play hockey, and I'd trip a kid, and Jason tripped a kid. And then what happened is they were playing at the opposing rink, at the opposing town's rink, and the adults started to scream the N-word. Get that off the ice. And this would have been probably in around 1980 or so. And, you know, that's not that long ago. And would people have reacted like that if it was me? I mean, I tripped kids and never got screamed at like that. Might have been called a jerk or, a dirty player, which I could be sometimes. I was a nasty little kid at times, as many are. Anyway, I'm rambling on way too much. Anyway, I hope I was able to provide a forum for some thoughtful discussion, for some introspection. You've given me things to be introspective about, even C.O. Jamalik, with whom it seems I disagree on a lot of points. I think ultimately, you know, condition of the heart. You know, we are all brothers and sisters, and we can all be brothers and sisters in Christ. And so I like, pardon me, when I do go over an hour, and I'm at an hour and 45, my voice starts to rake out. When Moses gave these words from God to Abraham to speak over the people of Israel, and in a world filled with turmoil, you know, this horrible crash, over the Potomac, or in the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., and, you know, all the animosity, all the political sniping across the aisle that's happening both in Canada and the U.S. We've got 2 elections coming up in this country. One provincial, Ontario, our largest province, and then national sometime between now and October. And the one thing I think most people crave is peace. So I ask you to receive these words, not mine. God gave them to Moses to give to Aaron, to speak to God's covenant chosen people. And the words are these: the Lord bless and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And if you get into a relationship with Jesus Christ, you can find that peace. And that's how I'll end. God bless everyone for showing up. And if you just subscribed, as Mr. Norman did, Esquire, much appreciated. Everyone else, you're welcome to do the same. And usually I don't go on this long. Usually it's around an hour. And if you tune in late and you missed the live, just play me at double speed. I don't talk that fast. I'm usually pretty comprehensible. And C.O.J. Malik writes that Jesus knocked over tables in the temple. Yes, he did, in his Father's house. Did he not say in Scripture that the Messiah would have zeal for his Father's house? You're not going to turn my Father's house into a den of thieves and robbers and a place of trade. Condition of the heart. Anyway, God bless. We'll talk to you all probably tomorrow night. Night all.